If you are new here, I do see some new names. So welcome if you're new. My name is Megan. I am a registered dietitian and I am manager at St. Jude Wellness Center. And I teach every month on a variety of different topics. So today we're going to talk about actually one of my most favorite topics is meal planning and meal prepping. They kind of go together. They're kind of the same thing as meal planning and meal prepping, but I find that that's usually the hardest thing to do. You've had your nutrition prescription, you know you're supposed to eat low carb or high carb or low fat or high fat. You've talked to a dietitian, but how do you apply that? And I find so many people get really bored with what they're eating. And they just kind of feel like they get stuck in a rut, and that leads us to go eat out or to go, do whatever we do where we're maybe not eating exactly what we should be eating. So I love this topic because I think meal planning and meal prepping can be actually really fun, and we can make it really easy and really streamlined if you have a formula, if you have a process. And I will also preface this with meal planning is a skill. And this is something I hear all the time from clients is they feel like they're just bad at it. They feel like they're doing something wrong because they don't know what to cook for themselves or for their families. And just constantly keep in mind that it is a skill. It is something that we have to practice. Just like if I were to tell you to go build a table, you would have to practice that for a while. You would have to go research your tools and you'd have to play with those tools and you'd make a table and the first one would probably be really bad. And each time you get better and better. The same thing with meal planning and meal prepping. So don't be so hard on yourself. Know that it's a skill that you have to keep practicing. It's not born in us the way that I think most people think it should be. So anyway, all that to say, let me pull up my screen and we will get started because I actually have quite a long set of slides for you today. So just open. If you have a question, please put it into the chat as we go and I will get to them at the end. This is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the website, and in the recording caption, the slides will be posted. So I actually am moving away from sending the recording out to everyone registered because we're getting so many registrants now. So just know that usually within 2 days, the recording will be on the website under the video tab, and the slides will be in there as well in the caption. So just keep that in mind and send me feedback too if that process is horrific and you actually really need the recording sent to you. I can work through that process. All right, so let's work on meal prep. Also, happy March. March is National Nutrition Month, and last week was National Dietitian Day. So hopefully you all gave a dietitian a big old high five. And let's get going. So we're just going to do a lot. We're going to review our plate and our portion, because if you don't understand the guidelines around how to portion your plate, then it's really hard to meal plan because you're not really sure what is your meal and your plate actually supposed to look like. So we're going to go over that, and then we're going to look at kind of my formula for meal planning. So this should look more or less familiar to most of you. The idea of the My Plate or the balanced plate, depending on where you first learned this concept, there's a lot of different versions of this plate. This one is my favorite because a lot of times the versions are cut into 4 separate sections, and dairy is given its own section. This plate really looks at macronutrients more than just the source of the food, because fruit and rice are both starches. They're not really 2 separate categories of food necessarily as far as what they do to the body. So when I'm thinking about meal planning and categories of food, I'm thinking about categories as far as how your body reacts and responds to that food. So starches are their own category. Protein is its own category. Fiber and vegetables is its own category, and then fats. And we're going to go through each of these really quickly so that you're not like, wait, what's a starch? But keep in mind, in general, your plate for pretty much every single meal should look like this, where half of the plate is vegetables or a high fiber plant food. Quarter of the plate is starches, and a quarter of the plate is protein. And we have like a tablespoon, 1 to 3 tablespoons of some sort of healthy fat somewhere in that mix. Sometimes that's some avocado that's thrown on top, but sometimes that's the oil that was used to cook the protein. So again, we'll go through these, but this is kind of your general concept of every time you eat a meal and you plan a meal, does it include more or less this ratio of items? Hello, let's go. There we go. And if you're more of a portion person, you're like, oh, yeah, that's great, Megan, but that plate is this big versus this big makes a big difference. Think of your hand as your portion sizes. Your vegetable portions should be like 2 scoops full. You should scoop up that salad. Your carbohydrate portion should be 1 scoopful. So think about how much rice you could scoop into your hand and have it not fall through your fingertips. Protein is about the palm of your hand, and then your fat is your thumb. So that kind of gives you a good idea too if you're more of a portion visual person than the plate. So let's go through those categories. The first category is fiber. We've got to eat more fiber as a nation, as a culture. Most people are meeting less than half of their daily fiber needs. And fiber isn't just important for making sure that we go to the bathroom. Fiber is really crucial for your microbiome, which helps you to digest and process and metabolize all of your food and absorb those nutrients correctly, and can lead to inflammatory concerns if our microbiome is not healthy. So that fiber serves so many purposes. It helps keep us full. So half of our plate is fiber. Now is where you get to personalize it. When we're talking about meal planning and meal prepping, is your half of your plate doesn't have to be a salad. Your half of your plate doesn't have to be carrot sticks. You can personalize this depending on your preferences. First of all, your just general likes and dislikes, but also based on your health. So for instance, if you are someone who has autoimmune conditions or a history of cancer, or you just got over the flu. Maybe it's just a short-term immune concern because you're just kind of trying to recoup because you just got really sick. You might want to focus in on some of these more powerfully immune boosting foods, such as mushrooms or mushroom powders, bitter greens, such as dandelion greens or kale, beets, bell peppers, because they're incredibly high in vitamin C, and any crucifer vegetable. So that's any vegetable with a big leafy green, which could be something you're eating like kale, or could be something like broccoli or cauliflower that's surrounded by a big green leaf. All of these types of vegetables are super powerful for the immune system. So it doesn't mean you have to eat only those if you have immune concerns, but if you have an immune concern, you might want to prioritize these on a daily or a weekly basis in that half of your plate. As you're thinking through your meal planning for the week of, okay, what vegetables should I include? You might want to always include bell pepper. If you already like bell pepper and you have an autoimmune condition where you need more vitamin C, amp those up. You could also think through raw versus cooked and how you're cooking, because that impacts the food itself. If you are someone who has really healthy digestion, you can go more raw. You can get raw carrots and raw cucumbers and tomatoes, and you can do salads. If you are someone who has IBS, IBD, SIBO, just bloating in general, you might want to lean a lot more on steamed, roasted, even really tiny shredded up vegetables, because the more work you do to break down the fibers before you put them into your body, the less work your stomach has to do, so you have less tummy issues. So that doesn't mean one is right or wrong. Raw carrots are lovely and cooked carrots are lovely, and they both have different benefits, because when you cook one, you trigger the release of some nutrients and you eliminate others. So they're both great. And if you are someone who can tolerate both, I recommend having both. But you also can lean on one versus another depending on your digestive system. You might want to think through fun types of vegetables, especially if you have little kids around. And typically kind of like the fun ones tend to also be more of your carb replacement vegetables. So zoodles or spiralized vegetables, instead of just zucchini, you can have zucchini noodles, parsnip or carrot fries instead of potatoes, cauliflower or turnip mash instead of mashed potatoes, shredded veggie pancakes. And even if you're not replacing carbs, these can just be a way to kind of jazz up and make fun your vegetables. And then you may also have to personalize your vegetables if you are on certain types of medication. So if you're on warfarin, you have to be really careful about how many green vegetables you eat. Not that you have to minimize them, but you have to be consistent with how many. If you're on renal medication, you might have to be careful with how much potassium you're eating. So you got to personalize this category of it. All right, starches. First, let's define them, because this is often a very big source of confusion. What equals a starch or a carbohydrate? That is anything that increases your blood sugar. And it doesn't mean that it increases your blood sugar a lot, but anything that brings blood sugar up is a starch. So fruit counts as a starch or a carb, but so do grains, even if it's a whole grain. So we're not talking about what type of starch or carb is better than another. We're just talking about the category of starches, remember, which is a quarter of your plate. So all grains, whether it's white rice or brown rice or wild rice, ancient grains, whether that's spelt or farro or bulgur. Then you have your gluten-free grains like quinoa, amaranth, millet, buckwheat. And then you have your wheat strain of things. So that's durum wheat, semolina, white wheat. These are basically where you're getting your cereals and your bread products. These are all grains. Depending on the type of grain, you're getting a different level of fiber and a different level of gluten, but they're all increasing your blood sugar to some extent. So you can, if you're choosing to eat grains, first of all, you might choose not to if you have one of those digestive issues like IBD or SIBO. But if you can tolerate grains, great. That can be the quarter of your plate. You can have them on their own as a side dish, like just steamed white rice. Wonderful. You can have them mixed in like a casserole. You can have them popped or cereal or in bread or tortilla or chip form. These are all different ways that you can start to think about how to eat grains as your starch. But you can also put any of these foods into your starch category. So starchy vegetables like potatoes, sweet potatoes, hard squash. By hard squash, I mean the kind that gotta dig into instead of zucchini where you could just easily cut it, something like a butternut squash or a pumpkin. Your hard, dense squashes are much starchier. Cassava, corn, beets, parsnip, and arrowroot. These are all types of vegetables, but these don't fit in that left-hand half of the plate. These are starches. So if you decide that you want sweet potato as your starch and you love it, and that's what's going to be your starch for that meal, we're not also going to have rice. We're going to have one or the other, or we're going to have a small amount of both. So if you're doing like a casserole that has wild rice and sweet potato mixed in it, you're just going to kind of be aware and cognizant of that casserole dish being half vegetables and maybe like a little bit of sweet potato and rice also thrown in there. But also fruit, peas, and any legumes such as a lentil or a bean, these also count as our starches. So again, and maybe instead of rice, we are having strawberries with our meal. And I think a lot of people think, oh, it's suddenly a low carb meal if I'm having strawberries and chicken and a salad. That's still an adequate amount of carbohydrate of starch if you're having a portion, which is about a handful of strawberries. That's still your carbohydrate for that meal. And then you can also have foods made out of these items. So cassava flour to make cassava tortillas. You can get lentils that are ground up into flour that are ground up into pasta. So lentil flour. Chickpea flour is actually one of my favorites because it is really high fiber and protein to get flour that's made out of chickpeas. And you can make like chickpea pancakes and use that instead of regular flour. So now we're actually using our starch as a source of protein as well. So this is where we can get really creative and take that recipe of pancakes and maybe turn it into something that fits our needs a little bit better. But either way, these are all types of starches. And you're just picking what is the starch that meets your needs best. And we'll kind of get to that as we talk about through the formula of meal planning. But I need you to be familiar again with these categories of foods. So how can we personalize this category? If we have autoimmune conditions, we may be limiting or possibly completely omitting grains. We may be looking at fruits and starchy vegetables and legumes as our source of starch because a lot of people with autoimmune conditions tend to react negatively to grains. Does that mean everyone with an autoimmune condition will react negatively? No, but these are trends that are often seen in the nutrition world. So if you're someone with an autoimmune condition and you've tried a lot of things and you're still having a lot of symptoms, you may want to take the grains out for a bit. If you have IBS or GI upset, we want lower fiber because the more fiber is more work for the gut. So even though we love fiber, it might be too much to tolerate if you're having an IBS flare-up. So you want to cook things really, really well. Or maybe have the lesser fiber versions of things. Instead of lentil pasta, maybe we just have regular pasta. If you are someone who's controlling carbs for whatever reason, you may want more of the plant starches and less of the grain starches and less of that category altogether. If you're really low carb or even keto, you may be taking that line of the starch and moving it up to where it's just a small sliver of the plate is starch and the rest of it is protein and fat. So if you're keto, you're going with almost no starch at all. If you're someone with celiac disease, you still have that quarter of a plate of starch at that meal, but you're looking for starches with no gluten in them. If you're vegan, you may be having a slightly higher starch intake depending on what you're looking for protein sources. And if you're SIBO, you may be looking at very specific types of starches based on the FODMAP diet. So again, there's no right or wrong. It's just dependent on you and your personal health history and which is going to be the best choice for you. Our protein section is the other quarter of the plate, a very, very important quarter of the plate, and one that's often overlooked, I would say, as less important, but it's so important, especially as we age, to make sure we're getting enough protein and we are getting that full hand-sized portion 3 times a day. And again, you start to personalize. First, you have to know, do you want a land animal or a sea animal from protein? We'll get to the plant sources on the next slide. But in the animal world, there's poultry, there's pork, there's beef, there's game, there's all these other types of animal protein. So you can choose what's available to you, what is within your budget, what tastes good, what your family likes. Also, maybe how much time you have. There may be days where you need to throw something in the crock pot so that it's ready when you walk in. You're probably not going to be doing steaks that night. You'll be throwing in some sort of round or shoulder into the crock pot. We also have our sea animals, which are really high in omega-3s. We have all types of fish and shellfish, and then you also have sea eggs. So they all have their benefits, right? Your fish are much higher in omega-3s than your land and ruminant animals are, but your land and ruminant animals tend to be complete proteins and have really good sources of B vitamins. So those are your benefits there. But there's also plant protein. So you can either eliminate animal or you can just bring in more plant proteins. The benefit here is they're very high in fiber. So you get a little bit of the benefit of the vegetable side in your protein side. You also get a lot of antioxidants. You just usually don't get as much protein. Plant proteins include legumes. So many different types of legumes, kidney beans and black beans and pinto beans. It's like, you remember the Forrest Gump thing with like all the different types of shrimp? That's always how I feel with beans. Like you could list it forever. There's also soy, and from soy, there's tofu and tempeh and soy milk and edamame and soy yogurt and soy cheese. There's nuts and seeds, and then kind of some of these others like seitan and spirulina, nutritional yeast. These are all plant proteins, and you can do so many things with them. You can eat them whole, mash them into like a curry or a dal. You could turn them into flour so that you have pasta and tortillas. And I don't mean that you have to do this personally, but you can buy, tortillas made out of lentils, things like that. You can have them dried, turn into milks, spreads, cereals, burgers, or meatballs are one of my favorite ways of eating plant protein. So make like a black bean burger, or even ground up. So then once you know your types of proteins and you know what you like, again, we personalize based on our health. So there's all these different ways of choosing what we're going to eat. If I have autoimmune conditions, I'll probably be leaning more toward animal proteins and less soy. If I have IBS conditions, I'll probably be eating less animal proteins, but I'll have to really make sure that I cook my legumes well and from scratch so that we're breaking down the fiber there. If I have anemia, I'm probably going to be looking at more animal, less dairy. Constipation, less animal, and soft cooking my plant proteins. And then there's also, even just outside of health, there's our religious and our cultural types of diets that may or may not help us make a decision around what kind of protein we're eating. And our geography. If you're someone who lives really far inland, you probably don't have a whole lot of access to fish. If you are aging, you need more protein. If you are on a keto or a renal diet, you're eating less protein. So there's all these different categories. And then I want to touch on the dairy section only because it's a little bit nuanced. And while I don't want you to think of it as its own food group as something you need to have all the time, you should kind of know what you're getting from your dairy. So a lot of times people think, oh, my dairy is my protein. Well, it can be, but it really depends on what dairy you're choosing. So this is your dairy spectrum from highest to lowest as far as how much protein you're getting. So if you're having sheep yogurt, goat yogurt, or cottage cheese, you are getting a really great source of protein there. And Greek yogurt too. Ricotta, regular yogurt, milk, and cheeses, you're getting less of. So just kind of think through that as you're choosing your food items for your plate, is how much is this contributing to my protein? If you're putting some, regular yogurt on your plate, that may not be enough. Or if, let's say, you're having like a vegan meal that really doesn't have any protein in it because you're also not using beans because you have a GI issue, You can't have a glass of milk and think that's a full source of protein meal because that's only about 7 or 8 grams. We'd have to find other protein sources for that meal. And then we have our protein or our dairy alternatives that are not sources of protein. So almond milk, everyone, that seems to be this really big misconception, is that almond milk is a great source of protein. It's not. Almond milk is a source of nothing because it's like the nutrition of 1 or 2 almonds. So it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It could be great if you're looking at weight loss, or if you're really making a smoothie that has a ton of other stuff and protein in it. You may not need it to be protein, but don't think that that's a protein source. Same thing with oat milk. It's actually pretty high carb. Coconut milk, almost no protein, but high fat. So you have all these different options, which are lovely. They're just not sources of protein like regular milk would be. Okay. And then we have our fat section. Fat should be part of every meal. Even if you're on a fat restriction, you should have some fat in that meal. So you may have to have less if you're on a fat restriction than me if I'm not on a fat restriction because of medications or heart health risk. But you need a little bit because fat helps us to absorb our nutrients in our food, and it's the cellular structure. So when people go on a completely non-fat diet, we run into problems. So that doesn't mean you always have to add fat. You might be eating fish or chicken that inherently has fat in it because it's an animal product, in which case you don't need any more fat in that meal. But if you're having a big salad with beans and just a bunch of vegetables, you're going to need either nuts or avocado or a dressing on that in a small amount. So small amounts could be 1 to 3 teaspoons if it's an oil or a dressing or a marinade, or 1 to 3 tablespoons if it's a whole food fat like avocado or olives. Those are my favorite, to be adding fat in whole food form. Avocados, olives, nuts, seeds, coconut, seaweed, because you're getting the nutrients, the phytonutrients, and the fiber from that plant food as well. And then you can turn those things into stuff, right? You can mash avocados into guacamole. You can make pesto out of nuts. But then you can also get oils too. So I prefer cold pressed oils because they're healthier for us. So that's olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, sesame oil, and flaxseed oil. And avoiding a lot of our seed oils like canola, grapeseed, safflower, sunflower, peanut, soybean. And you can use a little bit of animal fat in your diet like butter, ghee, and lard, but these ones we'd want to use on a more special occasion basis and in smaller amounts because of how high saturated fat they are. But then again, if you are on a medically controlled keto diet for seizures or various types of weight loss, you might actually need a little bit of the higher fat because we're getting rid of so much protein and carbs. So animal fats are not necessarily a bad thing. They just, in our general way of eating, most people are getting enough fat that they don't need the extra saturated fat from animals. Okay. All right, good. We're about halfway through. I had to check my time because that was a lot to go through. We haven't even really talked about meal planning yet, but it's so important that you understand those food categories because otherwise you can't meal plan appropriately. So now that you kind of know those categories, now we're going to get into the kitchen and the planning of things, okay? So meal themes. This, I hope, it did for me. I hope it will change your life if you have not heard of this concept before, because this makes meal planning so tangible and so realistic, especially if you are cooking for other people in your house, especially if you are cooking for children or picky eaters, even if that picky eater is your spouse who is an adult. But it really helps to organize. It organizes your time and your brain around food. If you are not someone who thinks in food, I always joke with my husband of like, I think in food, it's my language, versus he totally doesn't. So if you're not someone who thinks that way, but yet you're the food provider, this can help you to organize your thoughts. So meal themes. You choose a theme for each day of the week that fits your taste preferences. So you're starting with taste. Don't worry about your health needs or allergies. You start with things like Taco Tuesday. We all know Taco Tuesday, and Tuesday just means we're having something around tacos. Maybe you're having Fish Fridays. Maybe we do breakfast for dinner on Wednesdays. Pick your topic, and I'll give you some examples on the next slide, but think about your favorite kind of categories of food, if you will. Maybe it's a type of food like fish, or maybe it's a style of cooking, like maybe it's barbecue night. But think through your favorite themes or flavor profiles that could be a theme for each night of the week that you're cooking. And maybe you start with just 2 nights a week. Maybe you're starting with Tuesdays and Thursdays I cook, and Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we're still going out because I'm not there yet. But essentially, if you choose 4 types of meals underneath each of those themes, and I'll get to what I mean by that in a second, and you rotate through those every week, then you have a month worth of meal planning every single time. So let's look at this. So here's some examples of themes, meal themes. And these are, I'm just throwing things out there, but you could do pasta night. Maybe every single Monday is pasta night. No matter what, that's on your agenda. Maybe it's salad night. Maybe it's rice night. So underneath the concept of pasta night, you could have spaghetti with a salad. You could have roasted veggie pesto penne. You could have a Greek pasta salad. If salad night is your thing, man, we love salads in my house. You could do taco salad this week. You could do a grilled veggie and chickpea salad the next week. That's more vegetarian. You could do Chinese chicken salad the next week. You could create a theme around a certain ingredient. Maybe you're someone who you like to do like I do instant pots of rice so that I can just cook the entire bag at once. And then I separate it into the freezer and baggies so that each week I know I'm making something with rice because I have a month worth of rice in my freezer. So you could do rice, salmon, and broccoli like a bowl. You could do a tofu veggie teriyaki bowl. You could do stir fry rice. You could do like a Thai curry over rice, but maybe rice is what you need to kind of direct your mindset. Or maybe something like chicken. Maybe every Wednesday we're having chicken. I don't always know exactly what we're doing with chicken, but it's a chicken night. And so then I have my meal ideas underneath that. I have grilled chicken this week with some roasted vegetables. I have shredded chicken over baked sweet potatoes the next week. The next week after that, I have baked and breaded chicken with a salad. Maybe we have Taco Tuesday. Taco Tuesday could be taco salad, could be shredded meat in taco, like actual taco tortillas. Maybe we're having a taco bowl with shrimp. So see how the theme is the concept, and then you're creating a couple of different meal ideas underneath. Friday could be pizza night. That is in our house. Almost every Friday is pizza night. And sometimes we do homemade pizza, and sometimes we do like barbecue chicken, homemade pizza. And then next week we do homemade, but we just do veggies. So we're changing up the toppings. But sometimes we also might change up what type of homemade pizza we're doing. We might use like a crust from a box mix. My husband really likes to make homemade pizza crust, so sometimes we do that. Or it might be like a frozen pizza crust that's pre-made, and I'm doing all my own homemade toppings. You could have sandwich night, easy. And you could have different types of sandwiches. We could do a panini. We could do an open-faced shredded pork sandwich with a slaw on top. We could do turkey avocado sandwiches with a side salad. Breakfast for dinner is one of my favorites, and we often do this at like the end of a week or the beginning of a long weekend of food, so that we can basically throw everything we have into eggs. So we could do a cheese omelet dinner. We could do avocado toast and egg. We could do savory oatmeal. So just more ideas. Stir fry night, steak and grill night, bowl meal, crock pot, leftover. Like you name your theme and you come up with 4 meals underneath it. So here's what this would look like. So ideally, and you can do this right now, if you have a piece of scratch paper, make your week just like this. Write this whole table in and circle the days that you know you want to start cooking. So maybe we're going to start with, I'm going to cook on Sundays and Tuesdays and Fridays. And Sundays, I'm going to cook something in the crock pot that will make a ton of leftovers so that I have leftover night, on Monday, something like that. So maybe it's crock pot meat day is Sunday. And my different things that I know how to make in the crock pot are I can do a roast, I can do a shoulder, I can do a whole chicken and shred that up. And maybe I can do, what else could I do in there? Like a pork, okay? A pot roast, if you will. Those are my 4 things. So there's pretty much 4 weeks in every month. So this week I'm doing my roast. The next week I'm doing my chicken. The next week I'm doing my pork shoulder. And the next week, right? So then you're rotating. So then by the time you get back to the whole chicken all over again, it's been 3 weeks. We're not as tired of it anymore. and then we have leftovers the next day. Or maybe for casserole day, these are the types of casseroles I know how to make. I can make pot pie, enchiladas, like an Alfredo pasta casserole, different types of, you could have soup night, pizza night, like we talked about, seafood night. These are all things. So just take a minute here. I'm going to be quiet, and I want you to come up with at least one theme and at least 2 meals within that theme that would work for your house and your family. So it's so hard for you to be quiet on Zoom versus when you're in person with me. It's like, are you done? I don't know. But hopefully you have at least one and make that table. And that's kind of going to be your homework for the rest of this week, is come up with some themes and come up with some meals underneath them. And then the more you do this, the more experienced you get, the more you can throw some other themes into the mix. Or maybe you just add another 2 or 3 meal ideas so that it's taking you more than a month to rotate through. But to start, you start with the days you know you want to cook. And for some people, that's going to be 1 day a week. And for other people, they're going to try and cook 6 days a week. And underneath each theme, you have at least 4 different meal ideas that go with that theme. And you're just rotating through them. And this is so great because, one, it helps you to organize your thoughts around what you're going to get at the grocery store. You don't have to sit there in front of your computer screen or Pinterest or whatever and try and think, what am I going to cook this week? You go here and you're just circling, this is what I'm going to cook this week. And you post this on your refrigerator or in your kitchen wall. And family, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to eat. And if you have input or you want to add a meal idea to the rotation, you can do that. But this is how we're structuring food, and they know what to expect that way. And it's not just, well, what are we eating tonight? Or, it's so much easier to organize around this concept. Okay. So now we got to put this into action and actually do it, because having it pretty on the board and knowing what our themes are is one thing, but actually what is our stepwise process is quite another. So here's our steps. First of all, I want you to designate a day of the week to write your plan on paper. Okay, so we've already made our themes and we've made our meals within the theme. That's posted. But each week, I still have to organize my thoughts around, okay, which chicken dish am I making? Which stir fry am I making? Which pizza am I making, right? So I want you to designate a day where you are writing down exactly which of those meals from your meal themes you will be eating this week, and what you need to purchase for that meal. Because even though it's stir fry night, you might want shredded carrots versus broccoli, right? So your meal plan day is separate from your grocery day, or it can be the same day, but you're not doing it right before you run out the door. So for instance, I like to do my meal planning on Friday morning before the kids wake up. That's just like my thing, where I'm kind of thinking ahead for the next week ahead. I'm looking at my calendar for the next week ahead. And that way, if I'm able to stop by the store on my way home from work on Friday, I will. And that way my groceries is done for the weekend. Or if not, then I go Saturday morning, but I already have my grocery list prepared. So my meal planning is different than my grocery shopping, is different than my meal prepping. That's not for everyone, but I still want you to make an appointment like you would to see a doctor. When is meal planning day? To plan ahead for your next week, or maybe you only plan ahead for 3 days because you go to the grocery store twice a week. That's fine too. When you're doing your meal planning, you use your calendar to understand your week ahead, because while meal themes are wonderful, this week you might have to go to your kids' soccer tournament on Wednesday and you don't have any time to cook. So you need to make a stir fry for our Wednesday theme that's prepped ahead. Or maybe this week you have a meeting on Thursday and they're feeding you at the meeting, so you don't have to do your normal Thursday night meal theme. So do kind of look ahead as you're doing your meal planning, because it does need to be a little bit flexible. And then based on your week's needs and your themes, you create that meal plan. And start with just dinner for this. You can always eventually do themes for breakfast and themes for lunch. I mean, like this, if it works for you in your head, you can do as much as you want. I feel like when we're starting, it's so much easier to have like a breakfast this week and a lunch, and you just know I'm having oatmeal this week. I'm having a protein smoothie next week. And you're focusing more on the dinner planning until you get the hang of it. Because remember, it's a skill. So if you're trying to plan out breakfasts and lunches and dinners in this themed way, and you're having something different every single day for every meal, it's too much. You will walk away from it and you will hate it. So just know, all right, I'm eating the same thing this week for breakfast. And then next week, change it up. And the week after that, change it up. Okay. Make your grocery list based on that and stick to it. Then designate a day and a time for meal prep. So if you have stir fry and you know you're going to be doing a chicken, vegetable, rice stir fry, and you got all your stuff, is there anything that needs to be done ahead of time so that you can make that stir fry on Wednesday successfully? And that might, again, change based on if you have meetings and when you're coming home, but your meal prep is a little bit different than your meal plan. It doesn't mean you have to make that whole meal in advance. For me, I personally find that if my vegetables are cut, I can pretty much whip up anything on my meal themed and my meal plan. But if I come home late and my broccoli crown is still sitting there unwashed in the refrigerator, it's like, now I gotta wash it and I gotta cut it and I gotta do the thing. And it's just, for me, it's overwhelming. So I have learned over time, I do better if I cut all my vegetables ahead of time and I have them ready to go. Then I go to it. But there might be something that helps you better. And then you might need a method. Maybe you're someone who prefers mason jar meals or Ziploc baggies, or you want your breakfast already pre-made. Like there's so many other things you can do on top of it to help your future self. But the first thing is to just categorize and organize those meal themes. So I want to show you an example of my own personal calendar. And this was a while ago. This was a couple of years ago now. I should probably update it. But this is like my calendar that I was using. So no matter what, meal plan ahead day is always Friday, right? There's the 18th. That's my meal plan day, is Friday mornings. That hasn't changed in 5 years. So stick to it. Don't change your meal plan day up. Always make it the same day and time, and suddenly it's just your norm. It's like brushing your teeth. So on Friday the 18th, I was looking at my week ahead. I personally like to just go grocery shopping once and just get it done. So I look at my whole week. So I'm looking ahead. I see my husband's going to a bachelor party on Saturday, so I don't need to cook for him. Sundays used to be my meal prep day. It's still pretty much my meal prep day. And then looking at my week ahead, I was going to be home late on Tuesday. My husband and I were both going to be home late on Wednesday, and we had dinner with friends on Friday. Okay, so in my head, that means I don't have to cook on Saturday or Wednesday. I need a meal on Tuesday, but it probably needs to be totally pre-made and just ready to heat up. And I just need to have something to contribute to a dinner on Friday. So like those are my thought processes, and then I go to my themes. And there are so many different templates out there. The one on the left is the one I just made for myself once, and it's literally, this is my meal plan template. But if you Google meal plan template, you'll find so many cute things that people have made on Etsy and Canva, like the one at the top right, or there's journals that you can buy that are all color coded. So find the way that works for you in meal planning, but just remember, again, you're just picking a couple ideas for breakfast, lunch, snacks. You're having a theme for each dinner that you plan to make, and you're picking one of the meals from your themes to plug in. So it should eventually be plug and play. I know it's kind of a lot of work up front to be thinking of it, but eventually it should just be, that's the meal from Taco Tuesday that I'm making this week, and next week it's something different, and I write down my groceries. Okay, so those are stepwise processes. So let's go through some examples of breakfast. And this is going back to the idea of personalizing it. So let's say breakfast this whole week is going to be oatmeal. That's just what we're planning on. The standard American diet might give you microwave instant oatmeal that is full of sugar. Instead, I could use steel cut oats and add berries and peanut butter and flaxseed. And now I'm going back to that balanced plate idea where I have protein and fiber and fat, And I can make a whole batch in my crock pot on Sunday and just reheat it up each day all week long if I love steel cut oats, because steel cut don't work so well for instant, for microwave. But if I love my steel cut because of the fiber, I can just make a pretty big batch ahead of time. Maybe I have celiac disease, and so I have to have gluten-free, but I also am looking for a high protein option in my morning. I could make oatmeal with a different type of grain than oats, because oats are sometimes gluten-free, not always. Using buckwheat or amaranth, I could add protein powder to it and some hemp seed and some fruit. I could make my oatmeal savory. Okay, maybe I don't like it fruity. Or I could do completely no carb and do like a chia pudding style of oatmeal. And again, this is something I can batch prep a ton of mason jars on the weekend and just add my toppings and my crunchy things on top. Okay. Different ways of meal prepping breakfast. We can make smoothie kits. A lot of people love to do these. That's the picture up at the top right here, where you have all your ingredients for your smoothie except for your liquid in the freezer ready to go, and you dump it in the blender with your liquid and you go. So it takes some pre-prep ahead of time, but it takes the time out of your morning. Smoothie bowls is just basically take that smoothie, pour it into a bowl with some extra chia seeds and toppings, just so it's a different way of eating it than drinking it. You can eat it with a spoon. Chia pudding is really easy to batch prep. Oatmeal bakes are easy to batch prep. Overnight oats, so you could just do your same jar every single night the night before. Egg muffins, and these are things you can batch prep and freeze. Protein muffins or protein pancakes. So all different, things that you can make a lot ahead of time. All right, sandwich. Let's think through preparing and planning for sandwiches. I love sandwiches for lunch. It's just easy. I know what to do, but it needs to be healthier. It needs to meet my needs. So we could go high protein with it. We could have egg salad and veggies to get more fiber on a dark rye. So lots of fiber there. And I could make for that one, I could make my egg salad ahead of time so that each morning I'm just putting it all on top of bread. Or I can make it ahead of time, put them in containers, take my container with 2 slices of bread with me to work and kind of put it together. Minimal processing. Maybe you have some sort of like Ezekiel type of bread that has like no added ingredients in it. It's just all grains and fiber. And maybe you do open face so that it's not quite as high carbohydrate, and you put a whole lot of avocado and vegetables and shredded chicken on there. And now you're meeting your protein needs. You could do, this could also be for sandwich night if you're doing sandwiches for dinner and you do grilled paninis. You could do a completely low carb version by using like those little cauliflower flats as your bread option. Or you could do rolls, and you could even roll them up in just lettuce leaves, and that way it's a keto version. So these are all things that you could do with sandwich theme, which could be lunch or could be dinner. But there's all these different ways to not get bored of sandwiches and still be meeting your protein, your fiber, your fat, your starch needs. All right, some dinner thoughts. Taco Tuesday. I love it so much. It makes life so easy. On every Tuesday, we just know we're having something taco-ish. But this would be a standard American diet version of a taco. We could just make it a little healthier. Maybe I'm not trying to achieve any sort of health goal. I just want it to be a little bit healthier with a little more fiber. We could do corn or flour tortillas that aren't fried, grilled chicken, and lots of vegetables on top. Boom. That's a really healthy meal that could be Taco Tuesday. You could make it no grain because maybe you're having some SIBO stuff going on, and maybe you don't eat meat, or you just want to throw some omega-3s in there. So we do fish tacos on a cassava tortilla with pico de gallo on top. We could do a really high fiber veggie option of a taco that still has a good amount of protein by using a lot of beans and guacamole and fajita style vegetables. You can go low carb by using jicama shells or cauliflower shells. You can find those out there now. Maybe shrimp and cilantro, and that's all the toppings you have, but cilantro acts as a fiber, which is great. Or maybe you go with the taco bowl. We do this a lot because Taco Tuesday is one of the themes at my house, and we'll kind of rotate through. We'll do regular tacos this week, and next week we do more of a taco salad on a bed of rice or quinoa instead of the actual tortilla. And then maybe the next week we'll do tacos again, and then the next week we'll do a taco salad instead of a taco bowl. So these are all ways that you can work with that theme. And again, just some ideas. So you can work with mason jars, you can put things into containers. Bento boxes are awesome for lunches. Bowl meals I love because you don't have to worry so much about all the components being in their place on the plate. Just kind of throw it all in. Soups and stews, chilies, curries, burgers, patties, and meatballs. All of these things are how you can batch prep ahead if that is the type of meal prepping that works best for you. So some tips for yourself as you are going through meal planning and meal prepping is ask yourself, what can you do in these spare 10 minutes? Because I think a lot of times people will say, well, I don't have half a day to do all this meal prep, to chop up all my vegetables and make all this chia pudding. Well, who says you have to do it all at once? Can you prep your rice for your rice bowls on Sunday? And could you do it in the Instant Pot where you can walk away from it? Are you watching TV for 20 minutes? Could you do some chopping while you're watching TV? Do you have an extra even 10 minutes, right before dinner where you're just kind of waiting for dinner to keep cooking? Could you be washing up your greens in that moment in time or chopping some bell pepper? You don't have to do it all in one day. Just think, how can I help myself tomorrow with these extra 10 to 30 minutes that I have right now? Batch cooking ahead can be really helpful if you have the time to do that. There's a time investment up front that helps you later. Like I said, I often will just do some batch chopping and batch prep because doing the whole cooking often takes me too much time. But I will say if I see that I have a meeting coming up next week that I'm going to be home just like literally right in time to eat dinner, I might batch prep an entire casserole or something for that particular instance. Again, give yourself some grace. Don't try and do this for every single meal of the day. A 4 to 5 day meal plan allows for surprises and eating out. I never ever recommend a 7-day meal plan. It's just not realistic for most people and doesn't let you go out to eat. It doesn't let your neighbor pop over and say, hey, look, I brought you, egg rolls. My next door neighbor brings us egg rolls. And it doesn't allow for flexibility. Try and pack your lunches or your breakfast the night before. Maybe you need a meal delivery service or a service that will deliver things pre-prepped for you. Maybe that's your stepping stone into meal prepping. There is no shame there. You don't have to scratch cook everything. I also highly recommend jotting down meals as they come to you. I just put them on, I have like a little section in my notes section on my phone. And if I see something on Pinterest or I'm talking to a client and they say some great idea, I'll write that down because then as I'm going back through my meal themes, I can add those in because so often it's when you're sitting there trying to think about something is when our brains go blank, but you often come up with ideas as you go. So, do that. Take advantage of social media, food bloggers, or your favorite food magazines and cookbooks. And I'm going to show you some of my favorites in the next slide here, but it doesn't mean you have to make it perfectly like them. Like I follow some food bloggers who definitely are not healthy food bloggers, but they give me ideas of how I could cook or maybe a meal that my family might like. So if I see someone who makes some sort of like cheesy, ooey gooey casserole thing, and it's like, well, that doesn't meet my health needs, but I love that flavor profile they just used. So now how do I change that? And oftentimes, this is what Google and ChatGPT are for, right? Is you can literally type to ChatGPT, I have an autoimmune condition and require low fiber, high protein. I found this recipe and give it the link to something you found. Please make it meet my needs. There's so much you can work with if you have that initial idea. So don't just discount it if something doesn't look healthy. I will say, though, a caveat on that is not to think that everything can be perfectly altered. So I get a lot of these requests from my clients is they'll send me a recipe to like grandma's favorite cake that she used to make or some awesome sugar dessert thing. And like, how can you make this healthy for me, Megan? Do a swap. Exact swaps don't always work. Recipes are science. And so you can't just take this recipe, change it to chickpea flour and think that it's suddenly going to be perfect. It will probably change the texture and everything. So I usually recommend instead of swapping a recipe, like just swapping some ingredients, find a recipe with that same flavor profile that uses those other ingredients. So if you're looking for pancakes, you could write like maybe your favorite pancake is lemon poppy seed pancakes with blueberries, but it doesn't fit your health needs. You could type in into just a Google search, lemon poppy seed pancakes paleo, high fiber, or with cottage cheese, you know, things like that. And I guarantee you're going to find a recipe for it. If you need a picture with your recipe, like me, don't buy a cookbook without it, because then it's just going to sit on your shelf. And if you get overwhelmed with the idea of cooking, don't choose a recipe with more than 5 or 6 ingredients. It's just too overwhelming. Okay, so some resources for you. If you are in need of meal planning websites or apps because they exist, like you like this idea of the paper meal plan, but you need it on your phone, these are some good ones. Pepperplate, Engine 2, Cook Smarts, Plant-Based on a Budget. All of these are either ideas for meal planning or they're actual like apps that you can plug and play your meal plan into. If you are on Instagram or Facebook, some of these give great ideas. So I'm RD Megan. You're welcome to follow me. I just post like what my kids and I are eating. Meal Prep on Fleek is more like a meal planning platform. Culinary Nutrition, Real Food RDs are all paleo-based recipes. Danielle Walker is paleo with an autoimmune hint. Zach Cohen is a dietitian who does a lot of like healthy meal prep and batch cooking. Eating Bird Food has a lot of like, this is a healthier version of, so she has like a healthier Samoa cookie recipe, for instance. And the Women's Dietitian is focused on PCOS, but she has just amazing, easy meal ideas that she posts all the time, independent of if you have PCOS or not. So follow these people. And as you see something that inspires you, that looks delicious, flag it, save it, take a picture of it on your phone and save it to a folder in your phone and add those to your meal themes. If you do need a meal delivery service, again, these can be lifesavers and can help you get on track for this kind of meal prepping. There's a couple that I like a lot, prepared ingredients. So this means they're sending you the ingredients to then cook, but they're all prepared for you. HelloFresh, Sunbasket, Purple Carrot, and Marley Spoon are some good ones. If you want actual meals like this, you don't have to do any cooking, just this meal is ready for you. Trifecta, Freshly, Meals for Seniors, Nutrition for Longevity, and Factor Meals are some of my favorites that are really health-based and health-conscious. I love prepared meals for lunches because it lets my brain open up to do the meal themes and meal planning for dinner where I'm with my family and I want to be prepping food. And I get my lunches delivered to me. I don't do it all the time, but I love that concept. It makes life a little easier. And if you're searching, you're just like, okay, I get it. I want to start searching for recipes that fit into my meal themes. Here are some keywords. You can literally just type in healthy, healthy chili, healthy pancakes. It might not be your definition of healthy. It's whatever the writer's definition of healthy is, but you're usually going to find something that's at least higher fiber or a better source of fat than the original version. You can type in the word plant-based if that's what you're looking for, or with vegetables, or veggie loaded is another good one. So I was looking for a white bean chicken chili recipe the other day, and I typed in white bean chicken chili, and it was a lot of white bean and chicken with like nothing else in it, like grains and things. And so I just put veggie loaded white bean chicken chili, and boom, oh my gosh, so there's zucchini and bell pepper along with the white beans and chicken. So that's another good phrase. You could put low sugar or no sugar. You could do homemade version of, especially if it's like a restaurant type of recipe that you're looking for. You could do low carb or less fat, or you could search for certain ingredients. So you could say, I want muffins with almond flour. I want spinach meatballs that use chickpea flour. Like, tell it what you want to use, and almost always you'll find something. So with that, let me pull up our questions. We do have about 8 minutes. So if you have questions, type them in the chat. Before I answer the questions though, as I know some of you need to hop off and get back to work and all of that, we do have a virtual cooking class next week on Wednesday. I think it's at 11:30, and I'll be doing some meal prep recipes. So if you're not signed up for that, definitely do that. If you're signing up through the St. Jude Wellness Center website, it's under webinars. And let me answer some questions. What size of plate is best to use for portions? Such a good question, because plates nowadays are huge, right? I remember when we first moved into our house that was built in the 60s, we put our plates in and like the cupboard couldn't close because the plates were sticking out. Good question. It is I don't even know, like a kid plate, essentially, like like a big kid plate, not a little tiny toddler plate. So it's somewhere between your typical salad plate and most of the entree plates are really the plate size we're looking for. So most these days entree plates, you should be, the inner round is the size that really you should be filling up. So I know it's not a measurement, but that's kind of ideally. I'm surprised insects are on the protein list. Heard concerns about this. They're a source of protein. Insects are very much a source of protein. Now, do they have to be a source of protein for you or me? Not necessarily. It's definitely a cultural preference. But just like anything else, if they're well sourced and prepared healthily, there's no problem with eating an insect. You just want to know your source of it. And again, it's a cultural preference. I've had some insects that I liked more than others. Where are the PowerPoints saved? They will be saved in the caption of the video, and the video will be on the video tab of the website. What is the website for Meals for Seniors? Ooh, I don't know. Let me look it up. I thought it was mealsforseniors.org, but Meals for Seniors. It's been a while since I actually looked for it. Meal delivery. I think they changed their name. I'm so glad you asked me that. They I have to change my slides. Thank you for asking me that, Victoria. They've rebranded. It's Cook Unity now. They rebranded. So yeah, Cook Unity, which is cookunity.com, COOKUNITY. And they have a senior meal plan. I will change that. How do you account for broth in soup as a protein? Broth is kind of along the lines of milk, where a full cup gives you 7 or 8 grams, which is considered 1 serving, but we need 3 to 4 servings per meal. So if you have about a cup, and this is specifically like meat-based broths, not veggie broth. So if you have a cup of broth in your soup, then that's going to be 7 or 8 grams of protein, but you need 25 to 30 per a meal. So 1 cup is about 7 or 8 grams. You're welcome. Any other questions before I let you all have the rest of your day? Looks like that's it. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. I will get this posted to our website and over at Mount STAC as well as soon as I can. And I hope to see you all in the kitchen next week. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.